What if everyone is wrong? What if the people celebrating this deal are wrong? And what if the people claiming Trump just abandoned Israel are wrong too? Because the more I look at what's happening right now, the less sense the official story makes. We're being told there's a peace deal. Okay, where is it? We're being told the crisis is over. Okay, then why are the biggest questions still unanswered? We're being told that Trump just folded, that he blinked, that he caved under pressure, that he chose politics over principle. Maybe. But before we jump to conclusions, there are several things that simply don't add up. And the first one may be the biggest. Where is Israel? Think about it. If Iran just escaped with its nuclear program intact, if America just abandoned Israel, if the agreement is truly a disaster, then where is the outrage? Where is the public confrontation? Where is the emergency statements? Where are the leaks from senior Israeli officials saying this is unacceptable? I'm not saying Israel supports the agreement. I'm saying the silence is strange. And when something doesn't make sense, it's usually because we're missing part of the picture. And that's not the only thing. That's completely strange. We're hearing nonstop discussion about a deal. But what deal? Has anyone actually seen the full agreement? Do we know exactly what happens to the enriched uranium? Do we know exactly what Iran agreed to do? Do we know exactly what enforcements look like? Do we know exactly what happens if Iran violates the agreement tomorrow? The answer, my friends, is no. The public is being asked to celebrate a deal they haven't seen and condemn a deal they haven't seen. That should bother everyone. And then there's Trump himself. Love him or hate him, support him or oppose him. One thing almost everyone agrees on is that Donald Trump does not usually back down after making a public threat. For months, he repeated the same message. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Not maybe, not eventually, not after another round of negotiations. Never. So are we really supposed to believe that he suddenly changed his mind? Maybe. But there's another possibility. And before I explain it, I want to remind you of something. Remember the last time everyone said Trump was backing down? Remember the commentators? Remember the headlines? Remember the experts? Trump is retreating. Trump is afraid. Trump is blinking. Trump doesn't have the courage to follow through. And then what happened? The B-2 bombers arrived. The point isn't that history always repeats itself. The point is that appearances are often misleading, especially during war, especially during negotiations, especially when the people making the decisions know things the public doesn't know. And that brings me to the possibility almost nobody is talking about. What if this isn't the end of the story? What if this isn't even the final agreement? What if this is simply the next phase? Think about it. When you're hunting an enemy, you don't always charge forward. Sometimes you pause, sometimes you wait, sometimes you let your opponent reveal his next move. Sometimes what looks like retreat is actually positioning. Now, am I saying that definitely that's what's happening? No. Nobody outside the administration knows, but neither do the people claiming with absolute certainty that Trump surrendered. And that's my point. The people saying Trump lost don't know. The people saying Trump won don't know. The people saying the crisis is over don't know, because the most important question still remains unanswered. Where is the full agreement? What happens to the uranium? What are the enforcement mechanisms? What happens if Iran violates the deal? Why is Israel so quiet? And perhaps most importantly, why would Trump suddenly abandon the very position he has been repeating for months, unless there's something we still don't know. Maybe he folded, maybe he got everything he wanted, maybe there are provisions that haven't been released. Maybe this is simply phase one, or maybe this entire thing is setting the stage for something much bigger. I don't know, but neither does anybody else. And here's what I do know. The biggest mistake people make is focusing only on the politicians. Because from a biblical perspective, this story was never really about Trump. And it was never really about Iran. And it was never really about oil. And it was never really about elections. The prophets tell us that in the end of days, the attention of the world turns towards one place, Jerusalem. Not Washington, not Moscow, not Beijing, Jerusalem. Thousands of years ago, the prophets described a time when the nations would become increasingly obsessed with Israel, a time when Jerusalem would become the focus of world attention, a time when the Jewish people would return from the four corners of the earth. And what have we witnessed in our lifetime? The Jewish people returned. The state of Israel was reborn. Jerusalem reunited and liberated. Millions of Jews came home. The deserts began to bloom. The ancient language returned. The nation returned to the stage of history. As Israel became stronger, something else happened. The opposition became stronger too. The prophet Zechariah describes Jerusalem as a burdensome stone to the nations, a city that the world becomes obsessed with, a city that the nations gather against, not because of its size, not because of its wealth, not because of its military power, but because it is Jerusalem, because it is Israel, because the return of the Jewish people to their land forces the world to confront a question that cannot be avoided. Was this return an accident, or was it prophecy? And that is why I believe we have to be very careful when analyzing events like this, because whether this agreement succeeds or fails, whether Trump is right or wrong, whether this is a trap, a stage, or whether it isn't, the larger trend remains exactly the same. The nations are becoming increasingly focused on Israel, increasingly involved in Israel, increasingly divided over Israel, exactly as the prophets said they would. Maybe this agreement holds, maybe it collapses, maybe there's another phase coming, maybe there isn't. But one thing is beyond dispute. The eyes of the world are turning towards Jerusalem. The nations are becoming entangled in the future of Israel. And the Jewish people are continuing to return home. That isn't my prediction. That is what the trajectory of the prophets described thousands of years ago, and it's happening. So while everyone else is arguing about today's headlines, don't lose sight of the bigger story, because the biggest story isn't the argument or even the agreement. The biggest story isn't Trump. The biggest story isn't Iran. The biggest story is Jerusalem. And the biggest story is that the redemption of the Jewish people is continuing to unfold before our eyes. And if the prophets were right about the return, perhaps they're right about what comes next. Thank you for watching. Shalom. Please comment. I'd love to read your comments. Like, share, and subscribe. Shalom from the holy city of Beit Shemesh.